So this is an example of what the thermite reaction looks like when you see it. I mean, people will have seen this. Actually, I may have closed the wrong window. Okay, where have we gone? I'm just trying to get this picture up and I've lost the, there we go. So let's see if I can go down this tab again. I'll probably have to sign in again. Okay, so I'm just going to try and put that in the chat window. And there we go. And this is a picture of the thermite reaction. Okay, I just managed to close that tab. There we go. So if you click on that image, you will see what the thermite reaction looks like. Now that's just a small pot of thermite, probably about the size of a large plant pot. So that would be enough to maybe dissolve a small steel girder, or not dissolve, that's the wrong word. It would melt through part of a steel girder if it was on that. They actually used thermite to weld rails together on the railroads and the railways. So you imagine multiplying that by, let's be conservative, let's say 1,000 times. So you imagine that reaction going off 1,000 times, right? Because that's the sort of amount you would need to destroy the amount of the World Trade Center which was destroyed. It's probably more like 10 or 100,000 times, but we'll be conservative and say 1,000 times. So if you go back to that picture we were looking at with the thing turning to dust,
the bubbler picture.
Pardon?
The bubbler picture.
Yeah, the bubbler picture, the way it turned into dust.
Yeah.
You don't see any
missing a lot of light, isn't it?
Missing a lot of yellow, orange light. Similarly, it wasn't a hot nuclear explosion, because this, we were talking about this earlier, just before we came on air, that there's this thing going around, there's been a Russian data dump, and they claim that it was a nuclear bomb that went off, and this is shown by this rock underneath the bedrock. Again, it's disinformation. If you look into that story, those pictures of the bedrock, that was during an excavation of the base of the World Trade Center, and what they dug out was an old sunken shipwreck, I think from the 16th century or 17th century or something. And you can see pictures of this. I've got them posted somewhere. So again, if people want to see these pictures, they can write to me for the links, because somebody posted this in our Facebook group the other day. So, in other words, the nuke destroyed the towers, these huge structures, but the 16th century shipwreck survived then, according to the logic of these people. And we had...
I think they keep putting so many different stories out, it just keeps muddying the water, so people can argue amongst yourselves. Is it nukes? Is it thermite? Is it... But they never actually say. And it just muddies the water, stops people finding the truth. And the truth, as soon as the truth's been established, we can move on. No one argues whether water's wet because water's wet. As soon as we've got all on the same page, we can do something about it, or hopefully do something about it.
Right. So that's exactly right. And also, what's happened with Dr. Wood's research is they say, this is Dr. Judy Wood's theory, this is Dr. Judy Wood's hypothesis. No. It's not her hypothesis and it's not her theory. What she's put together is a collection of evidence which shows you what happened. And then, once you know what happened, you go on from there. We haven't got to that part yet. But, so we can establish, as she would say, that it wasn't a kinetic weapon or device which destroyed the towers. That's something that, like a bomb, that's a kinetic weapon because it explodes and then chunks go flying. And then, that creates damage to other structures and things. It wasn't that. It wasn't like a wrecking ball either, it wasn't destroyed by a wrecking ball, somebody crashing into it. It wasn't that. And it wasn't a gravity collapse which was triggered by a fire or some other process, because if the building had been cut into chunks either by nukes or by thermite or by planes, either of those three, or in fact, all of those three are completely ruled out because the building was dust before it hit the ground. So let's say that again. Bombs are ruled out, both thermite-type bombs, incendiaries, or RDX, or nukes. Planes as bombs is ruled out because the building wasn't cut into chunks, and those chunks never hit the ground in solid form. So what we need to look for, simply speaking, is some mechanism, a destructive mechanism, which turns things to dust in midair. All right? Now,
well, you've got more proof, didn't you? You've got the no earthquake data, no seismic data, when the towers came down.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. You're absolutely right, because if you go and look at the seismic charts for 9/11, which Dr. Wood's got on her website, if you go to that original page that I posted and poke around in links from there, in fact, I think it's probably on that page there somewhere, she has got the seismic charts for the day of 9/11. And you can see that these buildings, when they were destroyed, I think one of them was a 2.6 on the Richter scale and one was a 2.3. So this was roughly equivalent to the bottom 20 stories, coming down or being destroyed, falling to the ground basically. So it was the equivalent of the bottom 20 stories which went to the ground. So what happened to the other 90 stories? And you can see on that WTC page, there are some comparisons to this Seattle Kingdome, the Seattle Kingdome was like a big sports stadium in Seattle, and it was destroyed, I think, in 2001 with controlled demolition, planted explosives and so forth. And there's actually there's a really good video of it on the net, and they set up cameras around it so you can actually see a close range shot of this thing actually being blown up, and the dust cloud comes right past the camera, and it shakes and everything. And it's a very good comparison to what happened to the World Trade Center. And the Kingdome, that also had the same seismic signature as the World Trade Center, 2.3
And World Trade Center 7 had no impact, 0.6, like a jackhammer.
0.6, that's right, that's it, you got it. But about 0.6 was the recorded seismic signature, and this is in the NIST reports, and that's barely discernible from background. As you say, it's like somebody hitting a hammer on the ground. And if you look at the seismic chart for that event, you can hardly distinguish it from just the background signal that's always there, from all the vibrations, created by cars and whatever and stuff like that. So Building 7 also didn't hit the ground in solid form. And what does that mean? Building 7 wasn't a controlled demolition, not in the conventional sense of, planted explosives, which groups like Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth are still claiming to this day. They're claiming that Building 7 was a controlled demolition. They're claiming that thermite or nanothermite or thermate was used to destroy the towers, because that was what was found in the dust. And as you said earlier, Matthew, if you actually go and, I speak to people, they say, but Andrew, I thought it was thermite. I thought that had been established a few years ago. And I said, look, do you know what thermite actually is? And they'll go, isn't it an explosive? No. Oh, isn't it incendiary? Yes, it is an incendiary. Oh, but do you know what chemicals are in it? Oh, no, I don't know that. And the thermite is made up of two things. It's made up, and there are different types of thermite. You need an oxide, a metal oxide, and aluminium powder. And in the normal sort of regular thermite, it's actually iron oxide and aluminium powder. You mix those two together, obviously fairly freely available, and you put in a hot fuse. You need a hot fuse of several hundred degrees centigrade to set it off, so you can't just start it with a match. You need something like a magnesium strip burning to set the thermite reaction going. But what happens is you get molten iron and you get aluminium oxide is formed. It's what they call a redox reaction, oxidation reduction, if anybody's into chemistry, which I was. I did chemistry up until I left school, so I do know a little bit about chemistry. So iron oxide, well, anyone know you know what iron oxide is, don't you, Matthew?
Sorry?
You know what the more common name for iron oxide is?
No.
Rust.
Rust. Oh, okay.
So, going back to the World Trade Center, what did we have as part of the structure? Well, we had hundreds of steel girders. These steel girders have been standing in air for 30 years, approximately 30 years, perhaps slightly longer even. And what does steel girders do? What do steel girders do when they've been standing in air for 30 years? They rust.
We can also go to the Hutchinson effect for pretty much instant rusting anyway. So even if it wasn't rusty.
Yeah, that's a separate thing though. Yeah, so you could argue that some of the rust was due to that. That's true actually. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. But yeah, we'll perhaps jumping ahead a little bit there. But so and the shiny silvery exterior of the World Trade Center was, guess what, folks? It was an aluminium alloy. So for those guys like Stephen E. Jones and Richard Gage to say that thermite was found in the World Trade Center dust or unreacted thermite, well, what they're saying really, and what they're not saying to you, is that the remains of the building were found in the dust of the remains of the building. That's what they're saying. Or what made up the building was found in the remains of the building. In other words, we had iron oxide in the steel girders and in other bits and pieces of metal that would have been in the building, and we had aluminium. So this talk of thermite is a cover story. What they're saying is not untrue, right? So yes, thermite was found in the remains, but it's actually what the building was made of, or at least, not exclusively, but those two substances were present in significant quantities. Now, of course, they will argue, but that's, we know that this wasn't made up from the building because it's got this special signature and we found nanothermite. But they haven't got any evidence for that. They talk about these iron microspheres and this study that they did, but that's actually part of an additional story which we might get to if we have time. So we can now see why the two main reasons why the thermite story was started. The first reason is that they don't want people to know and understand and realise and become aware of that the buildings turn to dust before they hit the ground, because that is a new type of process which has never been seen in public before. At least, well, it was seen probably in 1995 in the Oklahoma City destruction of the Alpha P Mirai building, but that's perhaps again a later story.
I haven't looked into that.
Yeah. So it would appear that the same type of system was used, weapon system was used on the Alpha P Mirai building, or something similar anyway, and it was used on I think the Khobar towers in Saudi Arabia the following year in 1996. It appears they used it there as well. So, that's going off the point. So the thermite story was set up because they needed to cover up the justification of the buildings, as Dr. Wood calls it. The second reason was they can sort of make it fly because of what the building was made of, which was the large proportion of iron oxide, or not a large proportion, but a significant proportion that you could measure, a measurable proportion of iron oxide and a significant proportion of aluminium. So when they say that thermite wasn't found, they're not actually lying. Technically, they are in terms of it wasn't really thermite, it was just those two materials happened to be there. But that's how they made it fly.
The surface wave. So if the towers came down, there would have been an S wave and a P wave.
That's right. Yeah. I think it's as you say, the surface wave. I forget what the P wave is. I can't remember. Dr. will tell you about all of this. But yeah, basically there's a surface wave which comes along the top and a P wave which goes through the ground. And there was no, if I'm correct on this, I could have got this wrong, but there was no P wave. There was only an S wave, which means that if there'd been an explosion underground, or the explosive force had contact with the ground, it would have had a P wave as well, because that explosive force gets transmitted into seismic energy, transferred into seismic energy and goes into the ground. So that also suggests that whatever it was, the surface wave, was coming from just the process that was happening during the destroying of the buildings. I might have said that slightly wrong, but basically it means because there was no P wave, there wasn't an explosion, not of significant proportions anyway.
No, the wave that were observed, it were like just the tower's been removed. As Dr. Judy Wood says, as you get off your mattress, the mattress recovers. So that the earth would recover from that much weight being removed off it. because as the towers just get turned to dust, obviously the weight's gone. So
that's right. Yeah, I think that's it. I think you've got it. What happened there was that because the weight had gone, that actually caused the ground to flex, and that caused a surface wave. So it's like almost a negative explosion, if you will.